Hola chicos, en este video vamos a hablar de los pronombres de objetos indirectos, or indirect object pronouns. Quite a mouthful, either in English or in Spanish. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, like this poor little guy, what is an indirect object pronoun? I've never even heard of this before. Don't get down on yourself. We don't talk about them a lot in English because it's something we do naturally. And so hopefully by the end of this unit you'll be able to do indirect object pronouns in Spanish naturally. So let's talk about what they are. When we learn anything new, we always want to look back on our prior knowledge. So we do know what pronouns are. We know that they replace a noun. For example, I could tell a story about Jennifer Aniston, and I could say Jennifer, 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 Jennifer. Well, you don't always want to use a person's name the whole time. So in this case, I'm going to replace her with ella when I feel like it. Or I could replace los alumnos with ellos. Or I could replace mi amiga y yo with nosotros. Or whatever you want to do. So the function of a pronoun is to take the place of a noun. Now, that still doesn't help us know what indirect object pronouns are. And so in order to figure that out, we have to know what indirect objects are. So an indirect object is a for, at, or to whom an action is performed. So let's look at some examples, and I think you'll make sense of it then. I could prepare dinner for my mother. My mother would be the indirect object because I'm performing an action for her. I could give you a pencil. You would be the indirect object because I'm giving the pencil to you. Okay? I could pass the ball to you. You would be the indirect object because I'm not actually doing anything to these people or objects, right? They're indirectly affected because I'm doing it for you, or I'm doing it at you, or I'm doing it to you. Okay? So, just to reiterate, the indirect object is for, at, or whom an action is performed. So the example I just said is I passed the ball to him. So take a second and see if you can identify the indirect object. Then we have in Spanish the same thing. Yo le paso la pelota a él. And in both of these we have the same indirect object. We're passing it to him. The action is performed to him, so he is the indirect object. Okay? Now, some of you, side note, are going to say, why isn't this combined? Because we know that tilde makes it, you can't make that contraction, okay? So, let's go on to our next. Let's get some practice identifying the objeto indirecto, or the indirect object. Up here, at a reminder, it's for, at, or whom an action is performed. So what I want you to do is take however much time you need, pause the video, and I want you to, just in your head or maybe jot down, what is the indirect object of all of these sentences. When you're done, unpause me, okay? So, you should have gotten something like this. I buy a book for my mom. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, but I'm doing it for my mom. So she's the indirect object. You talk to the announcer. You're having that action to the announcer. So they are the indirect object. You give the pencil to the boy. Baseball bores them. This one's a little bit trickier because of the way we phrase it in English. But baseball is boring them. So baseball is performing an action. Who is it performing the action to or at? To them. So they are the indirect object. So let's try some in Spanish. If you need to, pause it. And I think the bottom got cut off, and I apologize for that. Let's see if I can lower that down. There we go. And pause me and identify the objeto indirecto. So, after you've unpaused me, you should get answers like this. El portero devuelve la pelota a su equipo. The goalie returns the ball to his team. So, he's performing the action to his team, so they are the indirect object. The chef adds salt to the soup. Now, we've practiced with mostly people so far, but an object can also be the indirect object, right? Because you're adding salt to the soup. The football player passes the ball to his teammate. So his teammate is the indirect object. The children prepare dinner for their parents. They are the indirect object. Okay? So just reiterating, for, at, or to whom an action is performed. In some cases, you'll see for, at, or to what. Okay? All right. So now that we know what the indirect object is, let's see about replacing it. Now, we know that pronouns replace nouns. So instead of saying, like we did previously, a su equipo, a su compañero, para sus papás, all those things, we can actually replace all of those with some really nice little words. So instead of saying at someone, to someone, for someone, we're going to replace that with me, te, le, nos, os, les. So like everything else we've learned, it fits into this nice, handy little box. But it's important to remember that me is to me, for me, at me. Te, to you, for you, at you. Le would be to, for, or at, el, e, usted. Nos is to, for, or at, nosotros, etc. Os and les for their corresponding boxes. But it's always to, for, at. The reason why it's so important to remember that to, for, at is that you can perform an action to another person, and it depends on who is receiving that action, not who is performing the action for what pronoun we choose. Let's go back one slide and take a look at what I mean. The goalie, sorry, my mouse is going crazy. The goalie returns the ball to his team. Now, this pronoun that we choose has nothing to do with the goalie. It has to do with the indirect object. So once you've identified the indirect object, that is how you select your pronoun. Okay? We'll get them practicing so it'll make sense. So when you look at these, I want you to read through them and see which one makes sense to you, remembering that it depends on to, for, or at whom is receiving the action. The indirect object pronouns have absolutely nothing to do with who is performing the action. Okay? So, pause this, and then when you're done, unpause it, and I'll give you the answers. A mí me aburre el béisbol. So, baseball is boring to me, so it's me, because it's to me. Okay? La profesora les habla a los alumnos. This is an example where you might have wanted to put le, because you're like, oh, the teacher. But it's not about who's verbing. It's about who's receiving the action. And in this case, it's los alumnos. And that's why we have to use les. Mis padres me retan a mí. Again, this is about me, so it has to be me. ¿A ti te gustan los deportes? So you might not know all of these words yet. You don't need to. But you know that it's a ti, and we know that a ti goes with te. Si tú me das dinero a mí, yo te comprometeré a ti. This should have a tilde. This one was really tricky, so let's go break it down. If you give money to me, sorry, my mouse is going nuts again. There we go. I will buy materials for you. So again, you have to give it to me, so it's me. And then I'm going to buy them for you, so it's te. Okay? So those are some practice with our indirect object pronouns. Now, you're going to ask yourself, why is the a or the para in the sentence if the pronoun replaces it? With indirect object pronouns, they're an example of a pronoun that can actually live in harmony with what it normally would replace. So we'll practice more to get into that, so that makes a little bit more sense. But you can have the a mí and the me in the same sentence, and there's no problem with that. In fact, it's often used for clarification. Okay? So, if you have any questions, let me know, and we'll see you next time. Bye!